If you have been wanting to try AdonisJS, or if you are an existing AdonisJS developer coming from version 5, this crash course on AdonisJS 6 will get you up and running with AdonisJS in no time. Before diving right in, let's take a look at what we will build in this course. We will be creating a simple microblogging application. It's a simple app, but enough to cover the fundamentals of the framework. Users will be able to register for an account, after which they will be able to create posts, update and delete their posts, and like their posts and other users' posts. AdonisJS is a fully featured Node.js framework for building web applications, ranging from server-rendered applications to API servers, and everything in between. It's a battery-included framework that provides most of the stuff you would need when building modern web applications, such as authentication, authorization, ORM, file uploads, caching, mailer, security, and much more. So you don't have to waste time implementing all these yourself, but instead focus on the business logic of your application. Before we get our hands dirty, let's look at what we need to run AdonisJS. AdonisJS requires Node.js 20.6 and above, so we need to ensure that we have it installed. You can check the version of Node.js you have installed using node-version. If you have Node.js installed, it will output the version you have installed. As you can see, I'm currently on version 20.14, which is above the required version. So if you don't have at least version 20.6 installed, or you don't have Node.js installed at all, you can head over to the Node.js website and download the version for your operating system, or you can use a Node version manager like NVM. Why not an AdonisJS requirement? You need to have MySQL installed to follow along in the course, as that is what I will be using. Of course, you can use any other supported databases like Postgres or SQLite. Now let's create our first AdonisJS application. We can do that using the npm init command, that is npm init, then AdonisJS at latest. Then we'll provide a name for the project. I'll be calling the app Posty for lack of a better name, but feel free to name it whatever you like. Then I will hit enter. The first thing we will need to do is select the starter kit we would like to use. As you can see, by default, AdonisJS provides 4 starter kits. We have the Slim starter kit, which basically contains just the framework core. Then we have the Web starter kit, which contains everything you would need to build a server-rendered application. Then we have the API starter kit, which is tailored for creating JSON APIs. Then lastly, we have the Inertia starter kit, which is tailored for using AdonisJS and Inertia. In this course, we will be building a server-rendered application, so we will be using the Web starter kit. Next, we need to choose the authentication guard we want to use. Again, AdonisJS has a couple of options we can choose from, but since we are building a server-rendered application, we'll be using the session guard. Then we need to select the database driver we want to use. Again, AdonisJS provides a couple of options that we can choose from. Like I said earlier, we'll be making use of MySQL, but feel free to use any of these. So this will download the starter kit, then it will install the necessary dependencies. Our new AdonisJS project has been created successfully. So now we can change directly into the project. Next, I'm going to open the project in VS Code, which is my preferred code editor. AdonisJS has great integration with VS Code with its first-party extensions. You don't have to use VS Code, as you can use whatever code editor you are comfortable with. The next thing we want to do is set up our database. If we take a look at the config directory, we will see that we have a database.ts file, which is the configuration file for our database. As you can see, it's using MySQL as we have set it while we are creating the application. Then we have the connection details as well as migration details. As you can see, it's using environment variables for the connection details, and these variables are stored inside the .env file. As you can see, some defaults have been set for us, which happens to be my connection details as well. My username is root and my password is blank. So if yours is different, you can update it accordingly. Then the database name is going to be Posty, which I have already created. As you can see, it's currently empty. Yeah, I am using Table Plus as my database management tool, but you can use any other tool that you are comfortable with. With everything configured, now let's start the development server using the ACE command line tool. ACE is a command line framework bundled inside the framework's core. So we don't have to install or configure it before using it. We can just use it right away. ACE has a bunch of commands for doing different things in the framework. And we can see a list of those commands by running node ACE. So we have different commands for doing different things. But the one we are interested in for now is the serve command, which is used to start a development server. So let's run the command node ACE serve. So this will start a development server with which we can use to access our application. As you can see, the server has been started and it's running on localhost 3333. So I'm going to open this in my browser to view the application. We can see the default landing page that comes with AdonisJS. It says it works, which means everything is working as expected. Alternatively, we can start the development server with the --HMR flag, which will monitor the file system and perform alt module replacement for certain sections of our code base. It's similar to before, but now it's going to watch for whenever we make changes in our application and restart the server so we don't have to manually do that. This is what we want as we build the application, so we don't have to start and restart the server every time manually. I'm going to leave this running and open a new tab where we will run subsequent commands. Now let's start building the application. We will be using Tailwind CSS to style our application. And for rapid prototyping, we will be pairing it with Preline UI, which is an open source set of pre-built UI components based on Tailwind CSS. So let's start by installing the dependencies. npm install. They are going to be dev dependencies. The first one we want to install is Tailwind CSS, then post CSS, then auto prefixer, then preline. Then lastly, we are going to install Tailwind forms at Tailwind CSS/forms. Once installed, we can run the init command to generate the Tailwind CSS and post CSS config files. npx Tailwind CSS init-p. Let's open the Tailwind config file. First, we need to add the path to all our template files inside the content array. AdonisJS template files reside inside the views directory, which is inside the resources directory. So we need to target all the template files in that directory. So /resources/views/***/**.edge. So what this does is to look for any file that ends with .edge, whether it's inside the views directory directly or inside a subdirectory inside the views directory. Also, since we are using preline, we need to also cater for that. Node modus/preline/dist/***.js. Then lastly, we need to register the plugins. First, we are going to register the Tailwind Forms plugin. Then we will also register the Preline plugin. As you can see, ESLint is complaining about us using required instead of using import, but I'm going to disable that. Lastly, let's open the app.css file, which is inside the resource directory. I'm going to get rid of all this. Then I'm going to add the Tailwind directives for each of Tailwind's layer. So at Tailwind, the first one is base, then components, then lastly, utilities. AdonisJS comes with Vite integration and everything already configured. So if we take a look at the Vite config file, as you can see, the entry points have been set to app.css and app.js. We just saw the app.css file. It's also set to watch and reload the browser whenever the template files changes. And if we take a look at the home.edge file, you will see that the entry files are being referenced in the view file. Let's open the app.js file. For now, it's just logging hello world to the console, but I'm going to get rid of it. Though we're not going to be adding any JavaScript in here, but I just want to get rid of the console log. So I'm going to save this. Since we started the development server with the HMR flag, Vite should have picked up the changes and started the build process. To be sure that we have Tailwind CSS configured, let's update the home page. So I'm going to add some Tailwind classes here. First, I'm going to make the text red, then make it bigger. Now, if we head back to the browser, as you can see, we're now using Tailwind CSS. But if you're not seeing the changes, you might have to rerun the serve command. By default, AdonisJS uses Edge as its template engine. Edge is a framework-agnostic template engine for Node.js created by the creator of AdonisJS. In addition to the typical stuff like interpolation, partials, and the like, Edge has a robust components layer with support for slots and the provide inject API. That being said, you can use any other Node.js template engine like Pog or Nonjux with AdonisJS. We will be using Edge in this course. By default, all template files or views go inside the views directory. Now let's create a base layout that the application will use. We will be creating the layout as a component. Edge components are stored inside a components directory within the views directory. So let's create the directory. Then inside of it, I'm going to create a new directory, which I'm going to call layout. Then inside the layout directory, I'm going to create a new Edge file called app.edge. You don't have to create a layout directory. I just like creating it to group my layouts in case I have more than one layout. For the content of the layout, I'm going to start by copying the content of the home page and paste it inside the layout file. First, we want the title to be dynamic. We're going to set a title for each page. So I'm going to reference a title here. Then let's add some class to the body. First, we're going to give it a background of gray 50. Then make it flex. Then set it to flex column. Then we're going to give it a mini height. Also, let's add some class to the HTML tag. We're going to set the height to be 100%. Then I'm going to get rid of this. We're going to have a navbar, then the main content area. Let's start with the navbar. I'm going to head over to preline to get the navbar. I'm going to copy this first one. We don't have a logo, so I'm just going to use the name of the application as the logo. Then this should point to the home page. I'm going to leave this as is for now, but we'll come back to it later. So let's work on the main content area. So I'm going to make use of the main tag. Then we're going to give it a class of grow. This is the main content area that we want to inject the dynamic part of each page into. So to do that, we're going to make use of slots. Unlike the title, where we used double curly braces, which will escape HTML entities. But since we want to insert the whole page content here, which can and will include HTML, and we want to display the HTML as is, we need to make use of the triple curly braces. Inside the component, we can access slots as functions via the $slots object. So $slots. This component will have just one slot, and that will be the main slot. And we can access it by calling the main function. The function is asynchronous, so we need to await it. So this is the layout component, and we have done it in such a way that it accepts the page title as a prop and its content as a main slot. Our layout component is ready. Now let's see how we can make use of it. So I'm going to head back to the home page and get rid of everything here. We need to make use of the layout we just created. Since the layout is a component, we are going to do at layout.app. The autocomplete and the code highlighting and formatting that you are seeing is as a result of the AdonisJS VS Code plugins that I have installed. Remember I said AdonisJS has great integration with VS Code. This is the component we created. The format is the directory the component is in, then the name of the component file. In our case, the name of the component is app, which is derived from the file name. And because it's inside a layout directory, that is why I had to prefix it with layout, which is the name of the directory. We don't need to specify the components directory because that is where AdonisJS expects all components to reside. The content of the page will be between the opening definition of the component and the end tag. For now, I will just bring back the it works heading. Remember, the layout accepts the page title as a prop, so we need to also pass that. And we can do that by setting the title to whatever we want. In this case, I'm going to set the title as post feed. Now, if we head back to the browser, we should see that the changes have taken effect. As you can see, the home page is now using the layouts we defined. Here we have the navbar, then the page content, and also is using the page title we defined. For users to create posts, they need to create an account, but we need a place to store users' details. We need to create a users table where users' details will be stored, but we will not do that manually. That is what migrations are for. When we created our AdonisJS application, a migration to create the users table was generated, which we can find inside the database directory, then the migrations directory. Migrations are used to define the structure and schema of database tables. As is, this migration will create a users table with 6 columns, that is an ID column, a full name column, an email column, a password column, a created at column, and lastly an updated at column. We will be modifying this migration to fit our application. We'll start by renaming this to just name instead of full name. Then the column is going to be not nullable. Then I'm going to create another column, which will also be a string. String here will translate to the varchar database column type. The name of the column is going to be username, and like the name column, it's also going to be not nullable. So that is the modification we are going to make. But before we run this migration, you will notice that this migration file contains 2 methods. We have the up method and a down method. So the down method is basically the opposite of the up method. So whatever we do inside the up method, the down method is going to do the opposite of it. In our case here, we are creating a users table with these columns. So the down method will do the opposite by dropping or deleting the users table. So how do we run migrations? We can do that using is node is migration run. This will execute the up method of the migration files. In our case, we only have just one migration, which is the one to create the users table. And if you head over to our database and refresh, we should see that we now have a users table containing the columns we specified. You will also notice that we have 2 other tables. These are the tables AdonisJS uses to keep track of migrations. Let's say for whatever reasons, we want to make modifications to the users table. Instead of doing that directly here, we can roll back the migration, which will execute the down method in the migration file. Again, we can do that using is. So node is migration rollback. This will do the opposite of run, which will execute the down method in the migration file, which will in turn delete or drop the users table. Now if we head back to the database and refresh, we should see that we no longer have a users table. But that is not what we want. So I'm going to run the migration again to create the users table. In addition to the migration file, a user model was also generated, which you can find inside the models directory that is inside the app directory. So this user model will represent the users table. AdonisJS uses models to interact with the database through its ORM called Lucid. Ideally, you create a model for each database table. This user model is based on the migration file that was generated, and since we have made modifications to the migration file, and in essence, the users table, we also need to modify the user model accordingly. First, we are going to rename this to just name instead of full name, and it can't be nullable. Then I'm going to duplicate this for the username column. Again, it's going to be a string. So that is the modification that we need to make, and every other thing will remain the same. With the users table in place, now let's add a way for users to create an account. We will start by creating a register controller, and we can do that using the make controller command. Node is make controller. Then we need to specify a name for the controller, which I'm going to call register. By default, AdonisJS is going to pluralize the name of the controller, but that is not what we want in this case. So we're going to specify that we want it to use the singular name, and we can do that by passing a -s flag, which stands for singular. As you can see, this has created a register controller, which we can see inside app, then controllers. The controller will have 2 methods. One for displaying the page that will contain the user registration form, and the other for processing the user registration form. I'm going to stop them out for now and fill them as we go along. The first method will be a create method. And the second method will be a store method. Next, let's create the routes that these methods will undo, and we can do that inside the routes.cs file. So we already have one route, which is the one displaying the home page that we have seen so far. So we're going to create 2 additional routes. So router.get, the first one is going to be a get route, and the URI is going to be register, and this will be handled by the create method inside the register controller. Then we'll specify the method. Then I'm going to duplicate this for the other route, which is going to be a post route. The URI is going to be the same thing, but instead it's going to be handled by the store method in the register controller. You notice that ESLint is complaining on how we import the register controller. That is because it is preferable to lazy import controllers than using the standard import. So there is an ESLint rule for that, which is why we are getting this error. And we can fix this by using the lazy import, or we can simply use the quick fix option. Now let's head back to the create method and start filling in its content. First, I'm going to uncomment this. Then we're going to pull in view from the HTTP context. And what we want to do inside this method is simply to render a view. So view.render. Then we need to pass the view we want to render. And the view we want to render is going to be inside pages/auth/register. The register page doesn't exist yet, so let's create it. So inside resources, views, pages, I'm going to create a new directory called auth. Then inside of it, I'm going to create the register view, that is register.edge. Mind you, you don't have to create these nested directory structures. I just prefer creating them that way so as to keep things organized. Like the home page, this will make use of the layout component. So at layout, then I'm going to set the title to be register. Then for the content, I'm going to paste a base markup, which we are going to build on. Here we have the title of the page. Then we have a link to a login page, which doesn't exist yet, in case the user already has an account, so they can just go and log in. Then here is where we'll create the registration form. The action is going to be /register, which is the register route we created earlier. By default, AdonisJS protects us from cross-site request forgery. So we need to add a cross-site request forgery field, which AdonisJS will automatically populate and check against when submitting the form. There is an helper we can use for that instead of having to manually construct the field. And the name of the helper is CSRF field. Now we can go on to define the actual fields for the registration form. First, we are going to wrap them inside a div and give it a class of grid and give it a vertical gap of 4. Then for the field itself, we are going to head over to Preline UI to grab a field component. I'm going to grab this one with a label. Then we will modify it accordingly. First, I'm going to get rid of this wrapper. Then this is going to be for the name field and the type is going to be text. Then I'm going to get rid of the placeholder and give the field a name of name, and the field is going to be required. Also, I'm going to change this to name so that the label and the input field are linked. To have an idea of what we are doing, I'm going to preview this in the browser. The register page is /register. I think we can reduce the space between the label and the field. Better still, we need to wrap them inside a div. This is more like it. So I'm going to duplicate this for the other fields that we're going to have. This will be username. Then this will be username as well. Then we have another one for the email field. Email. This is going to be email. Then email. Then lastly, we are going to have the password fields. This will be password, and the type will be password. Then this will also be password. Then lastly, we are going to have a password confirmation field. This will be confirm password. Then we are going to rename this to be password confirmation. We are going to see later why I name this password_confirmation. Then to submit the form, we are going to have a button. Again, I'm going to grab a button component from Preline UI. I'm going to grab this first one. Then the text will be register. Let's see how this looks in the browser. Let's update the button so it doesn't take the full width. And one way to do that is to wrap it inside a div. So we now have the user registration form. So what we need to do next is add a way to process the form once it is submitted. And we are going to do that inside the store method in the register controller. Like we did with the create method, we are going to pull in some stuff from the context. First, we are going to pull in a request. then auth, then session, then lastly response. The first step of processing the form is to validate the form data to ensure that the user supplied the correct details. By default, AdonisJS uses Vine.js as its validator library. Vine.js is a framework-agnostic validator library for Node.js created by the creator of AdonisJS. So that is what we will be using in this course. First, let's create a validator. And we can do that using the make validator command. That is node is make validator. Then I'm going to call the validator register. This will create the validator inside the validators directory, inside the app directory. As you can see, Vine is already imported for us, so all we need to do is start using it. First, we're going to create a variable which I will call register validator. Then to make use of Vine, we call the compile method. Then inside the compile method, we are going to construct the validator schema. So vine.object. The schema is where we specify the validation rules for each of the form field. We are going to start with the first field, which is the name field. And it's going to be a required string. So we can do vine.string, which will ensure that the field is a string and also required. Then we're going to do for the username field. Again, it's going to be a required string. In addition to that, we also want to make the field unique. That way, multiple users can't use the same username. Then we need to define how we want to determine uniqueness in our database. The unique rule accepts a callback, which is the ideal place for us to do that. Then in the callback, we have access to the database as well as the value for the field that the user supplied. Now we need to construct the query to determine whether or not the username has already been taken. Await db.from the users table. Then we want to select the username. Then we are going to have a where clause that checks if the username in the database equals to the username that was supplied. And then we get the first match. I'm going to save this inside a result variable. Then if the result exists, we are going to return false. Otherwise, we will return true. What we are doing is check against the users table if a record with the supplied username already exists. If it already exists, then we return false. That is, the username is already in use. Otherwise, we will return true, which means the username can be used. Next, we are going to add the rules for the email field. Again, it's going to be a required string. Then it must be an email address. Lastly, we also want to make the email field unique. So I'm going to grab all this and add it to the email rules. Then lastly, let's add the rules for the password field. Again, this is going to be a required string. Then we want to make sure that the password is confirmed. Remember in the registration form, we had a field for the password and a confirmed password field. The confirmed rule will ensure that the password entered here and the confirmed password matches. By default, Vine.js will look for a password_confirmation field to use as the confirmed password field. And that is why I named the field password_confirmation. But of course, you can override that if you are using something different and specify a different field. Since in our case, we are using the default name, so I'm going to get rid of this and leave it as is. Then finally, we need to export this. We now have our register validator comprises of the different rules we want for each field. The next thing is to use it inside the register controller. We can make use of the validator by doing await request.validate using, then we specify the validator we want to use, which is the register validator. Then this will return back the validated data, which I'm going to call payload. Of course, to make use of await, we need to make the method an async method. If any of the validation rule is not met, the form is going to fail, and AdonisJS is going to redirect the user back to the form with the necessary validation error messages. So we need a way to show error messages on our form when the validation fails. Let's head back to the register page. We are going to display the error message underneath each field. To get the error message, we can use the input error tag. The tag accepts the name of the field, which in this case is the name field. Then inside the tag, we can display the message. We can access the error message using $messages. Lastly, let's add some styles to the paragraph. First, we're going to make the text small, then make the text red 600. Then lastly, we're going to add some margin to the top. So this is how to display the validation error for a particular field. I'm going to copy this and do the same for the other fields. This should be username. Then this should be email. Then lastly, this will be password. While we are here, and remove the type button because we want the button to submit the form. Let's preview this in the browser. I'm going to try submitting the form. I'm going to deliberately enter a different password. As you can see, the validation failed and we are redirected back to the page with the error message. The validation failed because the confirmed password wasn't correct, but the other fields that were correctly filled have been wiped out due to the old validation failure. But that is not what we want. We want to retain the fields that were correctly filled so that the user knows to only address the ones that failed validation. Luckily for us, we can do that easily with AdonisJS. Let's head back to the register page. AdonisJS provides an old edge helper, which you can use to show previously filled values for form fields. So let's make use of it. So I'm going to add a value attribute. Then inside of it, I'm going to make use of the old helper. And it accepts the name of the input field, which is name in this case. Then we're going to specify a fallback and set it as an empty string. What this means is that if this field has not been filled, take the value of the empty string. But if it has been filled and other fields in the form failed validation, this will hold whatever value that is entered for the field. So let's do the same for the other fields. Then we'll change this to username. This will be email. We are not going to do this for the password fields because we want users to always re-enter their passwords. Let's head back to the browser and try filling the form again. As you can see, the validation still failed, but now we are retaining the values for the other fields that were correctly filled. Let's head back to the register controller. If the validation rules are met, the validation will be successful. And at that point, we'll get back the validated data, which we are storing inside payload. What we need to do next is persist the validated data inside the database. And we can do that using the user model. So await user, and that will import the user model. Then we can call the create method on the user model to create a new record. Then we're going to pass it the validated payload. This will create a new record in the users table with the validated data. And it will return the newly created record, in this case, which is the user. So let's save it inside a variable. Then we can log in the user since the user has successfully registered. We can do that using the auth object. So await auth. We need to specify the guard that we want to use, which was the session guard we selected while creating our application. So .use, and the guard is called web, which we can see inside auth.cs. And then we can call the login method on it. Since we already have the user, we can just pass in the user. And what this will do is log in the newly created user. Next, let's flash a success message so that the user knows that the registration was successful. We're going to do that using the session object and specifically the flash method on the session object. Then we're going to construct the message. I will create a notification object that will contain two properties. The first one will be the type of the notification. In this case, it is success. Then the message itself, which will be registration successful. Then lastly, we can redirect the user to the home page. Response.redirect. Then we'll specify the path we want to redirect the user to. In this case, we want to redirect the user to the home page. So this is how to create a user record. First, we validate the form data. Then we create a new record using the form data in the database. Then we log in the user. Then we flash a success message to the session. Then lastly, we redirect to the home page. Let's head over to the browser and create an account. I'm going to create an account for myself. We are redirected to the home page, which means an account has been created for us. But to confirm that a user record has indeed been created, let's head over to the database. If we check the users table, we should see a new record for the account I just created. I am currently logged in, but as it stands, we can't really tell. It would be nice to display the name of the currently logged in user and also a way for them to log out. So let's update the navbar to accommodate this. I'm going to get rid of all this. We want to display the user's name and an option to log out if the user is logged in. Otherwise, we are going to display links to either register or log in. We will check if the user is authenticated. We can do that using the isAuthenticated property on the auth object. So auth.isAuthenticated. Authenticated will either be true or false. True if a user is currently logged in, and false if a user is not logged in. We are going to display the username inside a div. Again, we can get the user details from the auth object, so auth.user, and specifically we need the name. Then we are going to have a way for the user to log out. For now, I'm just going to put a placeholder, then we'll come back to implementing it later on. But if the user is not currently logged in, we want to display the link to either log in or register for an account. So we're going to have an else statement. Then inside the else block is where we'll display the links. The first one will be to the login page, which doesn't exist yet, but we'll get to that shortly. And the text will be login. Let's add some styles to the link. First, we are going to give it a text of gray 600 and give it a font weight of medium. And then lastly, on over, we set the text color to be gray 400. I'm going to duplicate this for the register link. This will be /register and the text will be register. Let's head over to the browser to check this out. Despite the fact that I am currently logged in, I am still seeing the links to either log in or register. This is because the isAuthenticated property doesn't actually perform the check that determines whether a user is logged in or not. It only holds the authenticated state based on the outcome of the check. To perform the check, we need to call the check method on the auth object. There are a couple of ways we could go about doing that. For example, we could perform the check in a middleware. But to keep things simple and straightforward, we will perform the check directly inside the navbar, since that is the only place we will be displaying the logged in user details. We will do that just above the if check and call the check method inside an eval tag. The eval tag accepts expressions similar to the double curly braces. However, it doesn't write anything to the output, and which is what we want. So auth.check. This is an asynchronous method, so we need to await it. Now, if we head back to the browser, we should see the name of the currently authenticated user and the logout text. Next, let's implement the logout functionality. And we will start by creating an auth controller. Node is make controller, and then the name of the controller. Inside the controller, we will create a destroy method. This method will be responsible for logging out users. First, let's pull in auth from the context. Then await auth.use, want to use the web guard. Then we call the logout method. This will log the currently authenticated user out. Then lastly, we will redirect the user to the home page. First, let's pull in response. Return response.redirect, then to the home page. Next, let's define the logout route. Router, we are going to define the route as a delete request. So .delete. Then the URI is going to be logout. And this will be handled by the destroy method in the auth controller. Next, let's update the logout placeholder in the navbar. I'm going to get rid of this, and we are going to have a form that will submit to the logout route. Then we need to add the cross-site request forgery field. Then we'll have a button to submit the form, and the text will be logout. The styling of the form is going to be similar to the other links. So I'm going to grab this and paste it over. This won't work as is because the logout route was defined to be a delete request, but the browser only understands get and post requests. So if we were to submit this form like this, it's going to make a post request, and that is not what we want. We need it to make a delete request, which the logout route is expecting. So we need a way to mimic a delete request through the browser. We can easily do that with AdonisJS through what is called method spoofing. First, we need to allow method spoofing inside the app config file, that is app.ts. By default, it is set to false, so we need to set it to true to allow method spoofing. Then we update the logout form action to include a query string containing the actual request method. So /logout, the query string is going to be _method, and we are going to set it to the type of request we are making, which in this case is a delete request. Now let's head over to the browser and try logging out. As you can see, I have been logged out and redirected to the home page, and now we can see the links to either log in or register for an account. So far, we have been automatically logged in after creating an account. Let's add a way for users to manually log in, which will be ideal for returning users. We will be using the auth controller for this, and similar to the register controller, we will have two methods, one to display the page containing the login form, and the other to process the form. Let's create the first method, which will be the create method. Then we're going to pull in view from the context. Then the method will render the login page, view.render pages/auth/login. Next, let's create the login page. To save us some typing, I'm going to duplicate the register page. So this will be login, and this will be login as well. Now this text will be don't have an account yet. Then we point it to the register page, and this will be register. Then for the form, this will submit to a login route, which we will create shortly. Then we only need two fields, which will be the email field and the password field. So I'm going to delete the others. Then the button will say login. Next, let's create the route. I'm going to duplicate this. The first route is going to be a get route, and the URI is going to be login. This will be handled by the create method in the auth controller. Then the other one is going to be a post route to the same URI, and it will be handled by a store method in the auth controller. Before we create the store method, let's head over to the browser and check it out. This is already linked to the login page, so I can click to go to the page. Now we have the login page. Next, let's wire it up. And we're going to do that inside the store method. Let's create the store method. It's going to be an async method. Once the form is submitted, we need to verify the user's credential. And we can do that by calling the verify credentials method on the user model. So await user. The user model has been imported, then we call the verify method on it. This accepts the email address and the password, and we can get them from the request. But first, let's pull in request. Then we can say request.input. Then we want to get the email field. Then we'll do the same thing for the password field. The verify credentials method does the heavy duty of ensuring that the email and the password the user provided are correct. You might be wondering where the verify credentials method is coming from, since it is not defined directly inside the user model. The verify credential method is coming from the auth finder mixin, which the user model is using. This is also responsible for hashing the user's password before saving it inside the database. Remember when we created a user, we didn't manually hash the user's password, but what ended up being saved in the database is the hashed password. So the auth finder mixin does the hashing of the password automatically. And when we use the verify credentials method, it checks the user submitted password against the hashed password automatically also. If the credentials the user submitted are verified, the verify credentials method will return the user with that credential. So I'm going to save that as user. Now that we have the user, we can simply log them in by using the login method again. So await auth. Of course, we need to first pull in auth, then use the webguard.login, then we'll pass in the user. Then we can flash a success message. First, let's pull in session, then session.flash. Just as we did with user registration, I'm going to create a notification object. The type will be success. Then the message will be login successful. Then we can redirect to the home page. Let's pull in response. .redirect. But if the credentials could not be verified, the verify credentials method will throw an exception, which you can catch and present an appropriate message to the user. So I'm going to wrap this inside a try catch block. Inside the catch block, we are going to flash an error message. To save us some typing, I'm going to grab this and paste it. Now the type will be error and the message will be invalid credentials. Then lastly, we can redirect the user back to the page. Response redirect dot back. Let's head over to the browser and try this out. I'm going to log in with my details. As you can see, I am logged in. As you would have noticed, we are not seeing any of the success messages we have been flashing. The one upon successful registering for an account and the one for after logging in. That is because we are not displaying the flash messages yet. So let's fix that. We will be displaying the success messages on the home page, since that is where users are being redirected to after carrying out certain actions. First, I'm going to wrap this inside a div, and we'll add some classes to the div. First, we are going to set the max width to 2XL. Then we'll give it an horizontal margin of auto to centralize it on the page, then an horizontal padding of 6, then a vertical padding of 10. Then to display the success message, I'm going to grab an alert component from preline UI. We want to display the notification only when a message has been flashed to the session. So we need to wrap this inside an if check that will check if a notification has been flashed. We can do that using the flash message tag at flash message. This accepts the message key, which in our case is notification. Then we can end the tag here. We can get the actual message using the $message property and calling the message property we defined. Let's check this out in the browser. I'm going to log out and log in again. We can now see the success message. I'm going to do something similar on the login page to display the error message when we can't verify the user credentials. I'm going to grab all this and head over to the login page, and just before the form, I'm going to paste it in. Now we are displaying an error message, so I'm going to change the styling accordingly. Again, let's head back to the browser. I'm going to log out and try logging in with the wrong credentials. As you can see, we got the appropriate error message. Up to this point, we have used the migration and model automatically generated by the framework. Now let's see how to manually create migrations and models. To create models, we can use the make model command. Then we'll specify the name we want for the model. In this case, it's going to be post. We can also create the migration file alongside the model by using the -m flag. This will create the post model, and it will create a migration to create the post table. Let's open the migration file and add the necessary columns. In addition to the ID created at and updated at columns, we will add 2 more columns. The first one will be the ID of the user that creates the post, that is table.integer. The name of the column will be user_ID, and we're going to make it unsigned, and it cannot be nullable. Then we are going to add a foreign key constraint on the column. So .references. This is going to reference the user ID on the users table. Then on delete, we are going to cascade down. Then the second column will be for the post content, table.text. The name of the column will be content, and this also cannot be nullable. I'm going to save to reformat. With the necessary columns specified, we can go on to run the migration. Node is migration : run. We should now have a post table in our database, and sure we do. Next, let's update the model accordingly. First, we have the user ID. So at column, declare user ID, which is going to be a type of number. Then at column, declare content, which will be a type of string. While we are here, let's define our first relationship. Lucid provides out-of-the-box support for working with relationships between models. So once the relationships have been defined on the models, we can use the relationships through an expressive API, and Lucid will do all the heavy lifting of constructing the underlying SQL queries. Lucid provides different types of relationships, but we will be looking at a couple of them in this course. So now let's define the relationship between the user model and the post model. The relationship between the user model and the post model is a one-to-many relationship, meaning a user can create many posts and a post belongs to a user. On the post model, we are going to define a belongs to relationship. That is, a post belongs to a user. And for that, we are going to use the belongs to decorator. Then we need to specify the model the relationship belongs to. In this case, it is the user model. The user model has been imported. Then we are going to give the relationship a name. I'm going to call it user, and it's going to be a type of belongs to, which must also be a type of user. We have defined the belongs to relationship. Next, let's head over to the user model and define the inverse of this relationship, which is the as many posts relationship. You're going to make use of the as many decorator. And just like the belongs to decorator, we need to specify the model the relationship is for. This is going to be post. The post model has been imported. Then we specify the name of the relationship, which I'm going to call posts. And it's going to be a type of as many and a type of post. You will have noticed a pattern in the naming convention. We are currently on the user model, so this reads as a user has many posts. And if you head back to the post model, it reads as a post belongs to a user. So that is how to define relationships in AdonisJS using Lucid. Now, let's get to the meat of the application, that is creating posts. We will start with the form for creating posts. The form will be directly on the home page. I'm going to get rid of this. Then we'll have a form that will submit to a /posts route. Like before, we're going to add the CSRF field. I'm going to add some vertical space to the form, Y4. Then for the form field, I'm going to copy one of the form field from the register page. For this, we don't need a label, and this is going to be a text area field. Then we can get rid of this. The name will be content. Then we'll remove the value. Then we can close the text area. Let's see how it looks in the browser. Then I'll set the rows to 3 and also add a placeholder saying share and update. Next, we'll also grab the button from the register page. And the text will be post. Let's see how it looks in the browser. What we need to do next is wire up the form. And for that, we'll create a post controller. Node is make controller post. Inside the post controller, we are going to create a store method, which will be an async method. Before we go ahead and fill the content of the method, let's head over to the routes file and define the post route, router.posts. The URI is posts. This will call the store method in the post controller. Now we can head back to the store method. The first thing we need to do is validate the form data. Just like before, I'm going to create a dedicated validator. Node is make validator, and I'm going to call it post. Then inside the post validator, we will define the validation rules for creating post. So export const post validator equals vine.compile, then vine.object. The post creation form has just one field, which is the content field. The content is going to be a required string, and we are going to give it a maximum length of 1000. With the validation defined, we can make use of it inside the controller. First, let's pull in request from the context. Then we can make use of the validator. Await request.validate using the post validator. The post validator has been imported. If the validation passes, this will return the validated data. From the validated data, I'm going to extract the content. What we need to do next is create a post record with the supplied content. There are two ways we can do that. We can use the post model directly, that is, await post. The post model has been imported, .create. Then we can pass the content as well as the user ID. And we can get the user ID from auth. So let's pull in auth.user ID. This will create a post record with the supplied content and the ID of the currently authenticated user. So this is one way of creating a post. But since we have defined some relationships, we can as well leverage it to create posts. So I'm going to comment this out and use the relationship we defined to create a new post. That is await auth.user.related. Then we'll choose the relationship we want to use. For now, we only have just one relationship on the user model, which is the posts relationship. So we're going to select that. Then we call the create method and passing it the content. This will do the same thing as this, but now we don't have to specify the user ID here because it will be automatically filled since we are making use of the relationship defined on the user model. Once the post has been created, we can flash a success message. Of course, we need to pull in session. While we are here, let's also pull in response. Then finally, we can redirect back to the page. So this is all we have to do to create post. Let's check it out in the browser. Before we try this out, we need to ensure that only logged in users can create posts. So if we head back to the routes file, we can apply the auth middleware to the route. We can do that by calling the middleware method on the route. Then to get a list of the middlewares we can apply to the route, we will pull in middleware from kernel.cs file. And the middleware we're interested in is the auth middleware. The auth middleware will ensure that the request is authenticated. Otherwise, it will redirect the user to the login page. But if the request is authenticated, that is, the user is logged in, it will proceed to perform whatever action the user is trying to perform. While we are here, the logout route also needs to be restricted to only authenticated users. Instead of duplicating this and applying it to the logout route, I'm going to group the routes and apply the middleware to the group, which will in turn apply the middleware to each of the routes defined inside the group. We can define a route group using router.group. I'm going to move both of these routes inside the group and apply the middleware to the group. Now let's head over to the browser and create a post. So we've created our first post and we got the appropriate success message. We're not displaying the post yet, but if we head over to the database and refresh, we should see the post we just created. Now, let's display a list of posts that have been created on the home page. This will be the post feed. First, let's update the home page route to use a controller instead of rendering a view directly. So this will be a get route, and it's going to be handled by a feed controller. Then we can get rid of this. Let's create the feed controller. Node is make controller, and the name of the controller will be feed. And I want to make use of the singular name of the controller. So I'm going to pass the -s flag. Then let's import the controller, and we're going to create an index method on the controller. Next, let's create the index method. The method will be an async method. What we need to do here is fetch all the posts that have been created, and we can do that using the post model. So await post has been imported. Then we'll call the query method on the post model, which gives us access to the query builder. Then we're going to order the posts in a descending order based on when they are created. So order by created at, then descending. This will fetch all the posts in the database in a descending order based on the created at column. So we can save it in a variable, say posts. In addition to fetching the posts, we will also fetch the user that created the posts. Instead of looping through the post and for each post, fetch the user that created it, which will result in the n+1 problem. We will preload the user of each post, and we can do that using the preload method. This accepts a relationship, and in this case, it's going to be the user relationship we defined on the post model. Then lastly, we are going to render the home view as before. First, let's pull in view from the context. Then return view.render pages/home. Now we have all the posts that have been created alongside the user that created them. Then we pass the posts to the view so that we can display it on the home page. Next, let's update the home page. We will display the post below the form. First, I'm going to create a div and add a class of margin top 10 and space y5. Here is where we will display the list of the posts. So we're going to loop through the posts and display each of them. We can do that using the each tag. So post in posts. So you don't watch me type all the markup. I'm going to paste it in. The markup contains placeholders, which we will replace as we go along. First, let's display the name of the user that created the post. Because we preloaded the user that created each post, we can access the user from the post. So post.user.name. Then we're going to do the same thing for the undo at post.user.username. This is one way we can do this. Imagine we might want to make use of the user handle in multiple places, and having to do this over and over might not be ideal. So we're going to create an undo getter that will define once and we can use multiple places. We are going to do that inside the user model. Like I said, this is going to be a getter. So get undo, and it's going to return a string. and here we'll simply do what we have before. Since we're inside the user model, we can access the user with this. So this.username. Now we can update this to make use of the handle getter. Then for the actual content, post.content. Let's head over to the browser and see how this looks. We only have just one post, and which is what we are seeing. Let's create another post. I am logged in as a different user. I'm going to create another post. So we'll see that the feed displays all posts, irrespective of the currently authenticated user. So this is the post feed. Next, let's allow users to edit their posts. Let's head over to the route file and define the route for editing a post. We're going to define two routes. The first one will be responsible for displaying the form for editing the posts. Then the second one will be to process the form. The first one will be a get route. So router.get, and the URI is going to be posts / the ID of the post we want to edit, and we want this to be dynamic. So we make use of route parameter, that is column ID. This is the route parameter. ID here can be anything, but it makes sense to use ID since we are talking about ID. Then /edit, and this will be handled by the post controller, and specifically an edit method on the controller, which we don't have yet, but we'll create it shortly. The second route is going to be a patch route, router.patch. Then the URI is going to be post / the ID of the post we are updating. So again, :ID, because we want the ID to be dynamic, and post controller. And this will be handled by an update method. Let's start with the edit method. It's going to be an async method. What we need to do here is fetch the post the user is trying to edit and pass it to the post edit form. So const post equals await post.find or fail. This accepts the ID of the post we want to fetch. Remember, we are passing the ID of the post as a route parameter. So we can get the ID from the route parameter. We need to first pull in params from the context. And while we are here, let's also pull in view. So now we can do params.id. ID here is the name of the parameter we defined in the route. If you used something else while defining the route, you have to use whatever you defined in the route here. This will either return the post with the specified ID, that is if a record exists for it in the database. Otherwise, it's going to throw a 404 error. Lastly, let's render the view. This will render an edit page, that is pages/posts/edit. Then we need to pass the post. Next, let's create the edit page. To save us some typing, I'm going to duplicate the home page. The title of the page will be edit post. Then we can get rid of the flash message and get rid of this. We only need the form. The action of the form will be /post / the ID of the post. Remember, we defined the ID to be dynamic. So instead of hard coding a value here, we are going to pass the ID of the post. And since we already have the post, we can simply access the ID. So I'm going to wrap this inside double braces and make it a string literal. This will be /post / post.id. Remember, we defined the route as a patch request. We're going to append the query string here also, underscore method equals, in this case, it is patch. Then inside the text area, we want to display the existing content, and we can do that with post.content. But in case validation fails, we want to display whatever the user has filled in before the validation failed. Again, remember, we can do that using the old helper, and this will take the name of the field. What this means is that if the content field fails validation, we will display whatever that was filled for the field. Otherwise, we are going to display the content that is coming from the database. Then lastly, we can change this to save. Next, let's add the update method. It will also be an async method. Just as we did here, first we are going to fetch the posts we want to update. We need to pull in params from the context. Then we're going to validate the form data. So let's pull in request. Await request.validate using the post validator we created earlier. Then we can get the validated data, in this case, which will be a content. Then we can persist it to the database. Await post.merge. we want to update just the content field. Then we save the changes. Then we can display a success message. Then lastly, we will redirect the user to the home page. Before we try this out, let's update the edit link. So this will be /posts/ the ID of the post, then /edit. But we only want to display the edit and even the delete option for not just only logged in user, but the user that created the post. So we are going to wrap this inside an if check. Then the condition will be if the user is authenticated and if the user ID of the post is equals to the ID of the currently authenticated user, that is post.user.id equals auth.user.id. So it's only when this condition passes that we want to display the option to edit or delete a post. Then we can end the if statement. I wrongly created the edit page directly in the pages directory, but it should be inside the post directory. So I'm going to create the directory now and move the edit page inside the directory. Now we can head over to the browser and test it out. You notice that the edit and delete options no longer exist on this post. That is because I am currently logged in as John Doe, and John Doe has only created just one post, which is this. And because John Doe is the creator of this post, he can edit or delete the post. So now if we click on the edit link, it should take us to the edit form where we can update the post. So I'm going to update the content and save. As you can see, we got the appropriate success message and the content has indeed been updated. We want to be able to differentiate between posts that have been edited and the ones that haven't. So if a post has been edited, we want to show a text of edited so users know that that post has been edited. Let's head back to VS Code, and on the home page, if we scroll down, here we'll display the created at time for posts that haven't been edited. But for posts that have been edited, we will display the edit text, and when the post was updated, we're going to have an if check. If the created at time and the updated at time are the same, that means the post has not been edited. In that case, we will display the created at time. So post.created@ equals post.updated@. If they are the same, we'll display the created at time. Post.created@, then we'll call the toRelative method. We have access to the toRelative method and equals method because the created at and the updated at columns will return an instance of logs_on. If we check the post model or any of the models, you will see that both the created at and the updated at columns are defined as a type of datetime, which is coming from logs_on. So that is why we have access to these methods. But in case where the created at and the updated at are not the same, that means the post has been edited. So we are going to have an else here, and we are going to again display this. But instead of displaying the created at time, we are going to display the updated at time. Then also we have that edited text. Then I'm going to apply the same style to it. This should be updated at, and this updated at as well. Let's head back to the browser. Because we edited this post, we have the edited text and when it was last edited. But for the other posts, we are only showing when the post was created. Now, let's see how to delete posts. We will start by defining the route. This will be a delete route. The URL is going to be post/the ID of the post we want to delete. And just as we did for editing posts, the ID is going to be dynamic. Again, we'll make use of route parameter. And this will be handled by a destroy method on the post controller. Next, let's create the destroy method. This will be an async method. First, we'll fetch the post we want to delete. Await post.find or fail. And just as we did when editing post, this will accept the ID of the post we want to delete. So let's pull in params from the context. While we are here, let's also pull in session and response from the context. So now we can pass the ID to the find or fail method. Now we've gotten the post we want to delete. All we need to do next is call the delete method on the post. That is await post.delete. This will delete this particular post from the database. Then we can flash a success message. Then lastly, we can redirect back to the page. So this is all we have to do to delete a post. First, we fetch the post we want to delete. Then we call the delete method on the post to delete that particular post from the database. Lastly, let's update the delete button. We are going to do something similar as we did with the logout option. That is, we will wrap the button inside a form. The action will be to /posts / the ID of the post. And because the route is defined as a delete request, we need to pass the method spoofing query string, that is _method equals delete. Then we can have the cross-site request forgery field. Then I'm going to close the form. Let's head over to the browser and try this out. I am now logged in as myself, and as a result, I only have the options to either edit or delete my own posts. Let's say we want to delete this post. We got the appropriate message that the post has been deleted, and we are redirected back to the page. And the post is no longer displayed since it has been deleted. And we can also verify that by checking the database. We should now have just 2 posts in the database. Now, let's add the functionality for users to like posts. We will start by defining the relationship. A user can like many posts, and a post can be liked by many users. This is a many-to-many relationship. Unlike the belongs to or as many relationship, the many-to-many relationship requires 3 tables. 2 tables for each of the model, that is the users table and the posts table, and a pivot table. Since we already have the users and posts table, all we need to do is create the pivot table. So we'll create a migration for that. To create migrations, we'll make use of the make migration command. That is node is make : migration. Then we'll specify the name for the migration. I'm going to use post_user. This will create the migration file, which you can see inside the migrations directory. It has set the table name to be post_users, but that is not what we want. We want this to be singular. So Lucid uses a convention over configuration approach. Since we have a user model and a post model, Lucid is going to derive the name of the pivot table by merging the names of the models in an alphabetical order. So since P comes before U, Lucid is going to expect the pivot table to be named post_user. And that is what we have here as the table name. Of course, if we don't want the default behavior, we can override that and tell Lucid to use a different table. But in this course, we are going to stick with the convention and leave it as it is. Now, for the columns in the table, though we can have additional columns, but the required ones are the user ID column and the post ID column. So let's add those columns in addition to these. To save us some typing, I'm going to copy the column schema from the post table for the user_ID column, since it's going to be the same. So we have for the user ID, then we're also going to have another one for the post ID column. Now this will reference the ID column on the post table. And that is all we have to do for the pivot table. Now we can run the migration. Node is migration run. Next, let's define the relationship. We'll start by defining the relationship inside the user model. Like I said, this is going to be a many-to-many relationship. So we're going to make use of the many-to-many decorator. Like before, we will specify the model the relationship is for. In this case, it is for the post model. Then we can define the name of the relationship. I'm going to call it likes, and it's going to be a type of many-to-many and a type of posts. So this is how to define a many-to-many relationship. Because we added the timestamp columns on the pivot table, we can also specify here that we want to make use of timestamp. So the second argument to the many-to-many decorator is where we can specify options that we want for the relationship. So we can specify that we want timestamp on the pivot table by setting pivot timestamps to true. What this will do is, whenever a record is added to the pivot table, it's going to automatically fill in the created at and the updated at columns as well. Remember I said we can use a different table as our pivot table if we don't want to use the default convention. You can specify the name of the pivot table here and set it to whatever table you are using. And so doing, Lucid will use whatever you define as the pivot table here as opposed to using the default convention. But since we are using the default convention, I'm going to get rid of this. Then I'm going to also define this relationship on the post model. So I'm going to grab this and head over to the post model and paste it in. Now this will point to the user model. With the relationship in place, let's see how to use it. We will start with liking posts. And we're going to create a post likes controller, which will be responsible for handling that. Node is make controller post like. Then we will define the routes. It will be a post route. Then the URI will be post slash the ID of the post, then slash likes. And this will be handled by the post like controller, and specifically by a store method on the controller. Next, let's create the store method. I'm going to pull a couple of things from the context. The first one will be params, then auth, then lastly response. So to like a post, we need to first grab the post we want to like. So we're going to do the same thing we did with deleting and editing a post. Const post equals await post dot find or fail, then we'll pass the ID, which we will get from the params. Now we've gotten the post the user wants to like, and we also have the user that wants to like the post through the auth object. So what we need to do is make use of the relationship we've defined to like the post. So await auth.user.related, then the relationship will be the likes relationship we defined on the user model. Because this is a many-to-many relationship, we will call the attach method. Then we're going to pass the ID of the post as an array. What this will do is add the user ID and the post ID inside the pivot table, which means the user with this particular ID has liked the post with this particular ID. Then we can redirect back. So this is how to like a post, but as it stands, a user will be able to like a post more than once, which is not what we want. We want a user to be able to like a post just once. So before liking a post, we are going to perform a check. So before going on to like a post, we will first check whether the user has liked the post or not. If the user has liked the post already, we are simply going to redirect the user back without doing anything. Otherwise, we will allow the user to like the post. I'm going to put the logic for checking whether a user has liked the post or not inside the user model so that we can use it in multiple places. We will create an async method which we will call as liked post, and it's going to accept the post ID, which will be a number, and it will return a boolean. Then what we need to do is check whether the user has liked a post with this ID. Again, we're going to make use of the likes relationship. Await this related likes. As you can see, we're not getting autocomplete as before, and we are getting this TypeScript error. This is as a result of a known issue with TypeScript when using a model's relationship directly within the model. A workaround for this is to reassign this. So we'll create a new variable, which I'm going to call self, and set it as this. And we'll also make this a type of the user model. Now we can make use of self and the error is gone, and we will now have autocomplete as before. So next we will call the query method. Then we are going to have a where clause that will check if the post ID is equals to the supplied post ID. Then we are going to grab the first match. This will return an instance of the model, but what we want to return is a boolean. So we are going to cast this as a boolean. Then we can simply return it. Now we can make use of this method in the controller. Await auth.user. So instead of doing auth.user over again, I'm going to save it in a variable as user. Then here we can simply make use of user. And here also, so user dot as liked post, then we'll pass the ID of the post we want to check against. So if the user has liked the post, we are simply going to redirect back to the page without doing anything. Next, let's update the view. This is the placeholder for post likes. We will come back to displaying likes later. First, let's complete liking a post. To like a post, the user must be logged in, auth.is-authenticated. But if the user is not logged in, we are simply going to show the number of likes. So I'm going to end the if statement here. If the user is logged in and the user is yet to like the post, that is only when they can like the post. Otherwise, we will have the option for them to unlike the post. So again, we are going to have a check. We already have a way to check whether a user has liked a post or not. So we are simply going to use that auth.user.hasLikedPost. Then we'll pass the ID of the post. Here we are sure that the user has liked the post, so we'll allow them to unlike the post, which we'll come back to later. But inside the else block, we are sure that the user has not liked the post, so we'll give them the option to like the post. We're going to have a form. that will submit to /post / the ID of the post, then /likes. Like before, we will add the CSRF field. Then we'll have a button to submit the form. To save us some typing, I'm going to grab this and paste it over. Then we will change this to button. I think I made a typo. If we head back to the user model and inside the as liked post, this should be posts.id and not posts. Now let's head over to the browser and try liking a post. I'm currently signed in as myself. Now I can like any of these posts, whether it's my own posts or other users' posts. So let's like this post from John Doe. I have liked that post and I am redirected back to this page. But since we're not displaying the likes yet, we can't really tell from here. So let's head over to the database and check the post user table. So if I refresh, we should see that a new record has been created. As you can see, we have the record for the user ID of 1, which is my user ID, and a post ID of 3, which is the ID of the post created by John Doe. Next, let's display a post likes count. For that, we need to update the feed query. So let's head over to the feed controller. In addition to preloading the user, we are going to fetch the likes count for the post as well. And we can do that using with count. Then we'll pass the relationship, which in this case is likes. Then inside the view, we can access the count from the $extras object on the post model. That is post.$extras.likes_count. Let's also do the same thing here. Now, if we head back to the browser, we should see the likes count. This post has 0 likes because it hasn't been liked by anyone. But here, we are not seeing the like at all because the if block is currently empty. Let's tackle that next. Inside here, we know that the user has already liked the post and we want to give them the option to unlike that post. So I'm going to start by copying this form and paste it over. But this would submit to a different route, which we are yet to create. But the URI is going to be the same, but the route is going to be a delete route. So let's add the method spoofing query string _method equals delete. Then I will update the SVG as well. If we check this out in the browser, we should now see the post count and the indication that this post has been liked by the currently authenticated user. Next, let's add the route. I'm going to duplicate this. Like I said, this will be a delete route that will make use of the same URI, but this we call a destroy method on the controller. Let's create the method async destroy. Again, we're going to pull in params, auth, and response from the context. And just as we did before, so I'm going to grab this line and paste it over. Now that we have the post we want to unlike and the user that wants to unlike the post, we can simply just unlike the post. And we will do that using the detach method on the relationship. So await user.related.detach. Again, we'll pass the ID of the post we want to unlike as an array. Then lastly, we can redirect the user back. So this is how to unlike a post. The detach method is basically the inverse of the attach method. So while this will add the record inside the pivot table, the detach method will remove the record from the pivot table. Let's head back to the browser. I'm going to unlike this post. And the likes count is now 0 and there is no indication that I have liked this post. And we can confirm this by checking in the database. So if I refresh, that record no longer exists. The last piece of functionality we want to add to our application is to view user's profile by visiting the user's username in the browser. Of course, this is not going to work because we have not implemented it. So let's start by defining the route. Since this will be a wildcard route, we're going to define it as the last route so that it doesn't conflict with any of the other routes. So router, this will be a get route. And the URI will be the user's username. So column username. Again, username here can be anything. I'm using username because that is what it is called in the context of this application. And this will be handled by a user profile controller, which we need to create. Node is make controller user profile. And we want to use the singular name. So I'm going to pass the -s flag. Then we can use the controller Then this will be handled by an index method on the controller. Next, let's create the index method. It will be an async method. Then we will get params and view from the context. What we need to do here is fetch the user with the specified username. Await user.query.where username equals the supplied username, which you can get from the params. Then .first or fail, which will either fetch the first match if there is a match in the database, or it will throw a 404 exception if there is no match in the database. So we can save this as user. In addition to fetching the user, we also want to fetch the posts the user has created. So we will preload the posts relationship. I'm going to save to reformat. We're also going to fetch the posts count. So with count, then we select the posts relationship. Then also we'll fetch the likes count as well. Remember, this will get the number of posts the user has created, and likewise, this will get the number of posts the user has liked. In addition to preloading the posts the user has created, we're also going to preload the user that creates each of the posts and the likes count. We can do that by adding a callback as the second argument to the preload method. This accepts the query builder, which I will call query, and I can use the query builder to preload the user just as we've done before, and also get the likes count. Then finally, we can render a view, which we are going to call profile, that will be inside the pages directory. Then we'll pass the user to the view. Next, let's create the view. This time around, we are going to create the view using the ace command, node ace make view, and the view will be inside the pages directory, and the name of the view will be profile. And as you would expect, the view has been created in the specified directory. Just like the other views, this will make use of the layout component. Then the title will be the username, then the user handle. Then we're going to have a div with a class of maximum width of 2XL and MX auto with horizontal padding of 6 and vertical padding of 10. Then we have another div. We'll give this a margin top of 2 and the text will be center. Then we'll have a heading, which is where we'll display the username. Then we are going to add some classes to it. First, we are going to set the color to be gray 800. And the text size will be 3XL. Then the font will be medium. Then we're going to display the handle inside a span tag, user.handle. Then we'll set the text color to be gray 600. Then for the meta information, like the post counts and the likes counts, we're going to wrap them inside another div. We give this a margin top of 4 and make it flex. And the items should be center and justify centered. Then the text will be gray 600. Then space x2. Then we're going to have a span that will hold the user's posts counts. User.extras.posts count. Then we are going to have a label for this, which is post in this case. Then I'm going to duplicate this. Now this will be likes count. Then the label will be like. Let's see how this looks in the browser. You can see the user's details and the number of posts and likes the user has. Next, let's display the posts the user has created. I'm going to have another div. We are going to give this a margin top of 10, then space Y5. Just as we did in the home page, we're going to loop through the user's posts and display each of them. So each post in user.posts. So we're able to call post on the user object because we preloaded the post. This is basically what we did in the home page where we are displaying a list of posts. So instead of duplicating this code over in the profile page, I'm going to move this code inside a partial so that we can use it in multiple places. So inside the pages directory, I'm going to create a new directory, which we will call partials. Then inside of it, I'm going to create the post partial. So post.edge. Then I'll paste in the code. Now we can make use of the partial instead. So include the partial is inside the pages directory. then the partials directory, then posts. Then I can grab this and do the same thing inside the profile page. Now, if we head back to the browser, we should see the list of posts that the user has created, and sure we do. And if we head back, we should still see a list of all posts. Next, let's update the link to point to the user profile. So we'll do that inside the post partial. This will be / the user's username, which you can get from the post object. So post.user.username. So now we can link to user's profile. We want these labels to be dynamic, in the sense that, for example, if the post is more than one, we want it to display posts. That is, we want it to be singular or plural, depending on the number of posts that has been created. Same thing for the likes. AdonisJS has a string helper we can use for this, but it is not available inside a view. So we need to create an edge helper out of it so that we can use it inside the view. To create an edge helper, we will start by creating a preload file. Node is make:preload. Then we'll specify the name we want for the preload file. This can be anything, but I'm going to call it view. And we have been asked whether or not we want to register the preload file in the AdonisRC.cs file. I'm going to select yes because that is what we want. The preload file has been created inside the stats directory. To create an edge helper, we need to first import edge from edge.js. Then I'll also import the string helper from @AdonisJS /core/helpers/string. Then to create the helper, we use the global method. Then we specify the name we want for the helper. I'm going to call the helper pluralize. Then the second argument is where we define what we want the helper to do. And in this case, we simply want to call the pluralize method on the string helper. So this is all we have to do to create an edge helper. Now we can make use of it. So instead of hard coding this, we are going to make use of the pluralize helper. This accepts two arguments. The first argument is the label, which in this case is posts. The second argument is the number, which in this case will be the post count. We're going to do the same thing for likes. This will be like, and this will be likes count. Now, if you view this in the browser, we should see the difference. Because we have just one post, it's still saying post. And because you have 0 likes, the like label has now been pluralized. Just to be sure that this is working, I'm going to go into the database and make some modifications. First, I'm going to set the user that creates this to that of John Doe, which is 2. If I refresh, we should now see that we have 2 posts and the label has been updated accordingly. The application is now feature complete, bringing us to the end of this crash course on AdonisJS 6. I hope this crash course has gotten you up and running with AdonisJS 6. If you would like to learn more about AdonisJS, I urge you to check out the AdonisJS 6 from scratch course. I go deeper into everything covered so far and more. You will learn everything about AdonisJS by building a complete real-world application from scratch. As of this recording, the course is still in development, but enter your email address to get updates on the course. We will also notify you when we release the course. I will leave a link to the course down in the description.